Lieutenant Sarah Chen stared at the rejection letter on her tablet for the 100th time. The Galactic Defense Force had denied her application to join the elite Stellar Marines. Again. The reason was always the same: insufficient formal military training. What they really meant was that she was human, and humans were considered too new, too unpredictable, too untrained. She sat in the cramped quarters of the cargo freighter Meridian's Hope, watching the stars streak past through the small porthole. The ship was carrying supplies to Kepler Station, one of the outermost human colonies near the contested zone. Sarah had taken this job as a security officer because it was the closest she could get to real action. The galaxy was at war, and she wanted to fight. The other species in the Galactic Defense Force had centuries of military tradition. The Zephyrians were known for their disciplined formations and tactical precision. The Karathi excelled at space combat with their natural ability to withstand high G-forces. The Valdrin were master strategists, capable of calculating battle outcomes before the first shot was fired. Then there were humans, barely 200 years into space travel, with no formal military academies that met galactic standards. Captain Morrison, the freighter's commander, knocked on her doorframe. He was an older human, weathered by years of flying cargo runs through dangerous space. Chen were getting some strange readings on long-range sensors. Might want to take a look. Sarah followed him to the bridge where the sensor operator, a nervous young man named Peters, was frowning at his displays. "Captain, I'm picking up energy signatures about 3 light hours ahead. Looks like weapon discharges, but the patterns are wrong." Sarah leaned over his shoulder to examine the data. She had studied every known weapon signature in her spare time, dreaming of the day she might face them in combat. What she saw made her blood run cold. Those are Zerathi plasma cannons. The Zerathi were the galaxy's nightmare, a species of insectoid warriors who had appeared from beyond the galactic rim 50 years ago. They consumed entire worlds and turned the populations into their slave soldiers. The Galactic Defense Force had been fighting a losing battle against them ever since. "But that's impossible," Peters stammered. "The Zerathi front is hundreds of light years from here. They can't have broken through without us knowing." Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. Unless they didn't break through, unless they've been here all along, building up forces for a surprise attack on the core worlds. Captain Morrison's face went pale. If they hit Kepler Station, they'll have a staging ground to strike at Earth and the other human colonies. The freighter's communication system crackled to life. "Mayday, mayday. This is Kepler Station. We are under attack by unknown hostile forces. Repeat, we are under attack." The transmission cut to static. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. Kepler Station housed over 2 million civilians, mostly human colonists and their families. If the Zerathi had found them, those people had maybe hours before they were all dead or worse. "Captain, we have to help them," Sarah said. Morrison laughed bitterly. "Help them? We're a cargo freighter with a crew of 12. What are we supposed to do against a Zerathi battle fleet?" Sarah looked at the sensor readings again. The weapon signatures were strong but localized. Not a full fleet, maybe a single ship or a small squadron. It might not be a full invasion force. Could be a scouting party or an advance unit. If we can get close enough to assess the situation. And then what? Send a message to the Defense Force. By the time they mobilize a response, Kepler Station will be gone. Sarah knew he was right, but she also knew something else. She had spent years studying military tactics, not just human strategies, but those of every species in the galaxy. She had read every battle report, analyzed every victory and defeat. The Defense Force might consider her untrained, but she had trained herself. "Captain, I need to see our cargo manifest." Morrison raised an eyebrow but called up the information on his tablet. Sarah scanned through the list of supplies they were carrying to Kepler Station. Medical equipment, food supplies, construction materials, and there, mining charges. High-yield plasma explosives for asteroid mining operations. She looked up at Morrison. "How much do we have?" "About 50 tons. But Chen, those aren't military weapons. They're industrial tools." "Explosives are explosives, Captain, and I have an idea." She moved to the navigation console and began calculating trajectories. The Meridian's Hope was not built for combat, but it was built tough for navigating asteroid fields and surviving impact damage. More importantly, it was small and civilian-marked. The Zerathi might not see it as a threat until it was too late. "You're talking about a suicide run," Morrison said quietly. I'm talking about giving those people a fighting chance. Sarah turned to face him. Captain, the Defense Force thinks humans aren't ready for real combat because we don't have the training, the traditions, the calculated strategies of the other species. But maybe that's exactly what we need right now. Maybe being untrained means we're willing to try things others wouldn't dare. Peter spoke up from his station. Captain, I'm getting more transmissions from Kepler's station. They're trying to evacuate civilians, but the Zerathi are jamming their communications. The evacuation ships can't coordinate. Morrison stared at Sarah for a long moment. She could see him weighing the odds, thinking about his crew, his ship, his responsibility. Finally, he nodded. What do you need? First, we modify the mining charges for remote detonation. Then we plot a course that brings us in from the asteroid field side. Use the rocks as cover. If we can get close enough to the Zerathi ship, we might be able to disable it long enough for the evacuation to succeed. And if we can't? Sarah smiled grimly. Then at least we'll go down fighting. Isn't that what humans do best? As the crew of the Meridian's Hope began preparing for what might be their final mission, Sarah felt something she had never experienced before. Not fear, though that was certainly present. Not excitement, though her heart was racing. It was a sense of purpose, of belonging. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she needed to be. The files might mark her as untrained, but she was about to show the galaxy what an untrained human could do when everything was on the line. The Meridian's Hope drifted silently through the asteroid field, her engines powered down to minimum levels. Sarah had spent the last 6 hours rigging the mining charges while the rest of the crew prepared the ship for what everyone knew was probably a one-way trip. Captain Morrison had tried 3 times to talk her out of the plan, but each distress call from Kepler Station had strengthened her resolve. Chen, you need to see this, Peters whispered from his sensor station. They were maintaining communication silence, speaking only when absolutely necessary. Sarah floated over to his position in the reduced gravity. On his screen, she could see the thermal signature of Kepler Station and the massive shape blocking its main docking bay. The Zerathi ship was larger than she had hoped, easily the size of a Defense Force destroyer. How many life signs on the station? She asked quietly. Hard to tell with all the interference, but it looks like most of the civilian areas are still populated. The Zerathi haven't started the full harvest yet. That was both good and bad news. Good because it meant the civilians were still alive. Bad because it meant the Zerathi were taking their time, which usually indicated they were planning something bigger than a simple raid. Chief Engineer Rodriguez appeared beside them, his coverall stained with grease and explosive residue. The charges are ready. I've linked them to your personal communicator for remote detonation. But Sarah, I have to tell you, the yield on these things is way beyond what we calculated. If you're too close when they go off, I know, Chief, how close do I need to be to the Zerathi ship? For maximum effect? Within 500 meters, but that's well inside their defensive perimeter. Sarah nodded. She had expected as much. The plan had always been risky, but seeing the actual numbers made it feel more real. She was asking the crew to fly their ship into the heart of an enemy formation, with enough explosives to vaporize them all. Captain Morrison's voice came over the ship's internal comm. All hands, this is the captain. We're beginning our approach to the target. Everyone knows what's at stake here. I won't lie to you, our chances of survival are slim, but those people on Kepler Station are counting on us. Stay sharp, stay focused, and let's show these aliens what humans are made of. The freighter began its careful approach, using the larger asteroids as cover. Sarah watched the tactical display as they closed the distance. The Zerathi ship was even more imposing up close, its hull covered in organic-looking armor plating that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Smaller vessels, fighter-sized craft, patrolled in loose formations around the main ship. Contact, Peters reported. 3 fighter craft bearing 27 Mark IV. They're moving to intercept. Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. The Zerathi fighters were fast and heavily armed, but they were also predictable. They relied on their superior technology and numbers, not creative thinking. Captain, can you bring us around behind that asteroid cluster at bearing 31 Mark VII? The big one? That'll take us off our direct course. Trust me. Morrison didn't hesitate. The freighter's engines fired, pushing them toward the cluster of rocks. The Zerathi fighters followed, their plasma cannons charging for the kill shot. Sarah watched their approach pattern on the sensors, calculating angles and timing. Now, Captain. Hard to port! The Meridian's Hope spun on its axis, rotating behind the largest asteroid just as the fighter formation opened fire. The plasma bolt struck the rock face, superheating the surface and sending chunks of molten debris spinning through space. The fighters had to break formation to avoid the debris field, giving the freighter precious seconds. Brilliant, Rodriguez breathed. You used their own weapons against them. But Sarah was already thinking 3 moves ahead. The fighters would regroup quickly, and now they knew the freighter was actively trying to evade them. Peters, what's the status on the main ship? Still in position over the station. But Sarah, I'm reading massive energy buildup in their primary weapons. I think they're preparing to... Oh no, what? They're targeting the civilian shelters. If they fire at full power, they'll punch right through the station's armor and hit the emergency bunkers. Sarah felt ice form in her veins. The Zarathi weren't just raiding Kepler Station. They were preparing to demonstrate their power by massacring helpless civilians. It was a message to the galaxy. Surrender or watch your people die. How long until they can fire? Maybe 10 minutes for a full charge sequence, 10 minutes. It had taken them almost an hour to work their way through the asteroid field. There was no way they could reach the Zarathi ship in time using their original plan. But there might be another way. Captain, I need you to take us straight at them. Full throttle. Sarah, that's suicide. We'll never make it past their defensive screen. We're not going to fight our way through. We're going to bluff our way through. She grabbed the communication console and opened a channel on all frequencies. When she spoke, she used her most authoritative command voice, the one she had practiced in front of her mirror while dreaming of leading troops into battle. Zarathi vessel, this is Lieutenant Sarah Chen of the Galactic Defense Force. You are in violation of interstellar law. Withdraw from Kepler Station immediately or face the consequences. The response came in the form of a harsh, chittering laugh. When the Zarathi commander spoke, his voice was like broken glass. Foolish human. You pilot a cargo vessel with no weapons, no armor, no hope. We will add your biomass to our collection after we finish with the colonists. Maybe, Sarah replied calmly. But first you might want to check your sensors again. Look very carefully at what we're carrying. There was a pause. Sarah could picture the alien crew scanning their ship, discovering the massive quantity of high-yield explosives in their cargo hold. To a military mind, it would look like a bomb ship, a suicide vessel designed to ram targets and detonate. You would not dare, the Zarathi commander said. But his voice had lost some of its confidence, wouldn't I? You've studied humans, haven't you? You know what we're capable of when cornered. I've got 50 tons of mining explosives and nothing left to lose. Want to find out how close I can get before I trigger them? The freighter continued its approach, engines at full burn. Sarah could see the Zarathi fighters moving to intercept, but they were hesitant now, uncertain whether the approaching ship was prey or predator. Captain Morrison, she said quietly, when I give the word, I want you to launch every escape pod we have. Set them to automatic and spread them in all directions. Sarah, what are you? Just do it. And Peters, prepare to broadcast a message on all emergency frequencies. Tell any evacuation ships still functional to begin immediate departure from Kepler Station. The Zarathi ship was growing larger on their screens, its alien architecture becoming more detailed and threatening. Sarah could see weapon ports opening along its hull, charging rings beginning to glow with deadly energy. She was about to make the biggest bluff of her life, and everyone in the system was about to find out if an untrained human could outthink a species that had been conquering worlds for millennia. The distance between the Meridian's Hope and the Zarathi destroyer closed rapidly. Sarah watched the tactical display as enemy fighters swarmed around their ship, weapons charged but not firing. The bluff was working, but she knew it wouldn't last long. Zarathi commanders were known for their ruthless decision-making, and this one would soon decide to eliminate the threat regardless of the consequences. 2 kilometers in closing, Peters reported, his voice tight with tension. I'm reading massive weapons buildup on the main ship. They're going to fire everything they have at us. Sarah's hands moved across the communication panel. Captain, launch all escape pods now. Make it look random, like we're abandoning ship. Morrison hesitated for only a moment before hitting the emergency release. 23 escape pods ejected from various points along the freighter's hull, their small engines firing in different directions as their autopilot systems activated. To the Zarathi sensors, it would look like a panicking crew fleeing a doomed vessel. But Sarah had programmed each pod with specific coordinates. They weren't escaping. They were positioning themselves around the Zarathi ship in a loose sphere, each one carrying a portion of the mining explosives she had redistributed throughout the ship's escape systems. Clever human, the Zarathi commander's voice crackled over the comm. You think to surround us with your primitive devices. But our shields will protect us from such weak explosions. Sarah smiled grimly. The alien was right about the shields, but he was missing something crucial. She had studied every available report on Zarathi technology, and she knew their energy barriers were designed to stop high-velocity impacts and directed energy weapons. They weren't designed for something else entirely. Peters began broadcasting the evacuation signal. Tell all civilian ships to clear the station immediately. On the station, she could see through the main viewports that evacuation was already underway. Hundreds of small civilian craft were undocking and beginning to flee the area. The sight filled her with hope. Whatever happened next, at least some of the colonists would survive. 1 kilometer, Peters announced. The Zarathi are powering up everything. Primary weapons, secondary batteries, point defense systems. When they fire, they won't, Sarah said calmly. She opened the channel to the Zarathi ship again. Commander, I want to make you a deal. The alien's response was immediate and filled with contempt. We do not negotiate with prey species. Then let me tell you what's going to happen. In about 30 seconds, your ship is going to experience a complete power failure. Your engines will shut down, your weapons will go offline, and your shields will collapse. And then those colonists you're planning to slaughter are going to escape while you drift helpless in space. Impossible. Your explosives cannot penetrate our defenses. You're right. But you know what can penetrate your defenses? You can. Sarah triggered the detonation sequence. The escape pods, now scattered in a perfect sphere around the Zarathi destroyer, exploded simultaneously. But instead of trying to damage the ship directly, the explosions were precisely timed and positioned to create something else. A massive electromagnetic pulse. The mining charges weren't just explosives. They used plasma containment technology that, when disrupted, released tremendous amounts of electromagnetic energy. Sarah had calculated the exact positions needed to focus that energy into a concentrated EMP burst that would overwhelm the Zarathi ship's electronic systems. The alien vessel's lights flickered and died. Its shields collapsed, its weapons powered down, and its engines went silent. The destroyer began to drift, dead in space. Now, Captain, Sarah shouted. Full reverse. Get us clear! The Meridian's Hope's engines fired at maximum power, pushing the freighter away from the disabled Zarathi ship. But Sarah's plan wasn't finished yet. She activated her personal communicator, the one Chief Rodriguez had linked to the remaining mining charges still aboard their ship. This is Lieutenant Sarah Chen to all civilian vessels, she broadcast on all frequencies. The Zarathi ship is disabled. You have approximately 10 minutes before their systems come back online. Execute emergency evacuation procedures now. The response was immediate. Dozens of evacuation ships that had been trapped in the station's docking bays began launching, carrying thousands of civilians to safety. Transport vessels that had been hiding in the asteroid field emerged to assist with the evacuation, but the Zarathi weren't finished. As Sarah watched, smaller craft began launching from the disabled destroyer's hangar bays. The EMP had knocked out the main ship's systems, but the fighters still had manual controls. Incoming fighters, Peters reported. 12 contacts moving to intercept the evacuation ships. Sarah's mind raced. The civilian vessels were unarmed and unshielded. They would be sitting ducks for the Zarathi fighters. She needed to buy them more time. Captain, bring us around to intercept course. Full power to engines. And Sarah, we don't have any weapons. How are we supposed to? We are the weapon. The Meridian's Hope turned toward the approaching fighters, accelerating to ramming speed. Sarah knew the freighter's reinforced hull could probably survive one collision, maybe two. But there were 12 enemy fighters and she only had one ship. That's when she heard new voices on the communication channels. This is Captain Williams of the cargo hauler Iron Mountain. We're with you, Lieutenant. Freight runner Stellar Pride standing by to assist. Mining ship Deep Horizon armed with industrial cutting lasers. Ready to engage. Sarah stared at the tactical display in amazement. 8 more civilian vessels had emerged from the asteroid field. Other cargo ships, miners, and transport crews who had been making runs to Kepler Station. They were all converging on the Zarathi fighters, their improvised weapons charging. This is insane, Morrison breathed. A fleet of civilian ships against military fighters. No, Sarah said, watching as the ragtag human fleet arranged itself in a loose formation. This is what happens when you corner a species that refuses to give up. The first engagement began as the Iron Mountain's mining lasers lanced out at the nearest Zarathi fighter. The alien craft's shields flared but held, and its return fire damaged the civilian ship's engine section. But before the fighter could finish its attack, the deep horizon rammed it from the side, both ships spinning away in a cloud of debris. Sarah watched the battle unfold with a mixture of pride and terror. The civilian crews were untrained, uncoordinated, and completely outgunned. But they were also determined, creative, and absolutely fearless. They used ramming attacks, improvised weapons, and pure courage to engage enemies that should have destroyed them easily. "Lieutenant," Peters called out, "the Zarathi destroyer is showing signs of power restoration. I estimate 5 minutes before they're back online." 5 minutes. Sarah looked at the tactical display, counting the evacuation ships still fleeing the station. Most of the civilians had escaped, but there were still thousands more who needed time to reach safe distance. She made a decision that she knew would either make her a hero or get her killed. Probably both. "Captain Morrison, I need you to take us back to the Zarathi destroyer. Maximum speed." "Sarah, their systems are coming back online. If we get too close, and trust me, I have one more card to play." As the Meridian's Hope accelerated toward the enemy ship, Sarah began arming the last of the mining charges. This time there would be no bluff, no clever electromagnetic trick. This time she was going to ram 50 tons of high explosives into the heart of an enemy warship, and hope that her untrained human instincts were enough to save what was left of Kepler Station. The Zarathi destroyer's systems flickered back to life as the Meridian's Hope approached at ramming speed. Sarah could see weapon ports opening along the alien vessel's hull, charging rings beginning to glow with deadly energy. She had perhaps 60 seconds before they could fire. "All hands, abandon ship." Captain Morrison's voice echoed through the freighter's corridors. "This is not a drill. Abandon ship immediately." But Sarah remained at the navigation console, her hands steady on the controls despite the chaos erupting around her. She could hear the crew running for the remaining escape pods, their footsteps pounding through the ship's corridors. Morrison appeared beside her, a hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, that includes you. We've done everything we can." "Not yet," she replied, eyes locked on the tactical display. "I need 30 more seconds to reach optimal detonation range. The charges are set for remote detonation. You don't have to stay." Sarah finally looked at him, and Morrison saw something in her eyes that made him step back. It was the expression of someone who had found their purpose, their moment of absolute certainty. "Captain, someone needs to make sure we hit exactly the right spot. The Zarathi destroyer's main reactor is protected by 3 layers of armor. If I detonate too early or miss by even a few meters, we'll just scratch their paint job. Those civilians need this ship to stay dead." Morrison nodded slowly. He had been a freighter captain for 20 years, had seen his share of dangerous situations, but he had never seen anyone so completely committed to a course of action. "Then we stay together," he said simply. "This is my ship." "Captain, that's an order, Lieutenant." Peters looked up from his sensor station, sweat beading on his forehead. "Zarathi weapons are almost at full charge. 20 seconds until they can fire." Through the viewports, Sarah could see the last of the civilian evacuation ships clearing Kepler Station. The ragtag fleet of cargo vessels and miners was still engaged with the Zarathi fighters, but the battle was turning against them. 3 human ships had been destroyed and 2 others were drifting with major damage. "Incoming transmission," Peters reported. "It's from the Stellar Pride." Captain Williams' voice crackled over the comm, strained but determined. "Lieutenant Chen, whatever you're planning, you better do it fast. These fighters are cutting us to pieces, and I think I see reinforcements launching from the destroyer." Sarah looked at the tactical display. The Meridian's Hope was now less than 800 meters from the Zarathi ship's hull. She could see the alien architecture up close, organic curves and ridges that seemed to pulse with their own life. Weapon barrels were tracking their approach, charging to fire. "Peters, send a message to all human vessels. Tell them to clear the area immediately. Emergency burn, maximum distance. What about us? We're exactly where we need to be." The Zarathi destroyer's main guns opened fire. Plasma bolts the size of shuttlecraft streaked toward the approaching freighter. Sarah threw the ship into a desperate evasive maneuver, rolling to present the smallest possible target. The first shot missed by meters, close enough that the superheated plasma scorched their hull plating. 200 meters to optimal range, Morrison reported calmly. The second plasma bolt clipped their starboard engine, sending the ship into an uncontrolled tumble. Emergency alarms screamed through the corridors as atmosphere vented from the damaged section. But Sarah fought the controls, using the ship's maneuvering thrusters to stabilize their trajectory. 50 meters, Morrison announced. Sarah, whatever you're going to do. She triggered the detonation sequence. 50 tons of mining explosives erupted simultaneously, creating a ball of superheated plasma, bright enough to be seen from the outer system. The Meridian's hope vanished in the explosion, along with a significant portion of the Zarathi destroyer's forward hull. But the alien ship didn't die easily. Its exotic matter armor absorbed much of the blast, and its internal bulkheads held against the massive decompression. Emergency systems began sealing the breach even as the ship listed heavily to port. However, Sarah had aimed for more than just structural damage. The explosion had torn through the destroyer's primary power conduits, leaving it running on backup systems. More importantly, it had damaged the ship's communication array, cutting off its connection to the fighter squadrons. In space combat, coordination was everything. Without Central Command directing their attacks, the Zarathi fighters became confused and disorganized. The surviving human civilian ships, led by Captain Williams and the Stellar Pride, began to press their advantage. "This is Williams to all ships." The captain's voice rang out across the battlefield. "The big ones hurt bad. Let's finish this before they can repair the damage." What followed was unlike any space battle in recorded history. 8 civilian cargo vessels, armed with nothing but mining equipment and raw determination, began systematically hunting down military fighters. They used ramming attacks, improvised weapons, and tactics no military academy had ever taught. The Deep Horizon, its hull scarred from multiple impacts, caught a Zarathi fighter in its mining crane and simply crushed it. The Iron Mountain used its cargo bay doors as shields while firing cutting lasers with surgical precision. The Stellar Pride, her captain's voice steady over the comm, coordinated the attacks with the skill of a seasoned admiral. On Kepler Station, the remaining civilians watched in amazement as their rescuers turned predators into prey. The Zarathi, for the first time in decades, found themselves outmatched not by superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but by pure human stubbornness. "Look at that," one of the station technicians whispered, pointing at his tactical display. The aliens are retreating, it was true. The surviving Zarathi fighters were breaking off their attacks and returning to their damaged mothership. The destroyer's backup engines fired, pushing the massive vessel away from the station and toward the edge of the system. Captain Williams opened a channel to all ships. "This is the Stellar Pride to all vessels. The enemy is withdrawing. Repeat, the Zarathi are withdrawing from Kepler Station." Cheers erupted across the human fleet, but Williams wasn't finished. His voice grew solemn as he continued. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've won this battle, but we need to remember how. We didn't win because we were the strongest or the best trained. We won because when faced with impossible odds, we did what humans do best. We refused to give up. And we won because one young woman was willing to sacrifice everything to give us a chance." He paused, then added quietly, "Lieutenant Sarah Chen, call sign Meridian's Hope, gave her life so that 2 million civilians could live. Her files might have marked her as untrained, but today she showed the galaxy what human training really means." As the damaged Zarathi destroyer limped toward the outer system, its commander sent a message that would soon reach every corner of the galaxy. It was a simple warning transmitted on all frequencies. "Beware the humans. They fight like no species we have encountered. They turn weakness into strength and defeat into victory. Beware the humans." But in the debris field where the Meridian's Hope had made her final stand, something unexpected was happening. A small object was transmitting a weak emergency beacon, nearly lost in the electromagnetic interference from the explosion. It was an escape pod, heavily damaged but intact. And inside, unconscious but alive, were Lieutenant Sarah Chen and Captain Morrison, thrown clear by an automatic emergency system that had activated in the final seconds before detonation. The untrained lieutenant was about to discover that sometimes the galaxy has a way of rewarding those who fight not for glory or recognition, but simply because it's the right thing to do. Sarah woke up in a medical bay that looked nothing like the cargo freighter she remembered. The walls were pristine white metal, the equipment was state-of-the-art, and there were species she had never seen before working alongside human doctors. Her head pounded as she tried to sit up. "Easy there, Lieutenant," a familiar voice said. Captain Morrison sat in a chair beside her bed, his left arm in a regeneration sleeve, but otherwise looking remarkably well for someone who had recently been blown up. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. Where are we?" Sarah's voice came out as a croak. Zenith Command, the Galactic Defense Force headquarters. Morrison's eyes sparkled with something that might have been amusement. Apparently, news of our little adventure at Kepler Station has reached some important people. Sarah tried to process this information. The last thing she remembered was triggering the mining charges and watching the Zarathi destroyer's hull rush toward them. How are we alive? Emergency pod ejection system. Activated automatically when it detected imminent ship destruction. Threw us clear about 2 seconds before the explosion. We were picked up by the Stellar Pride about an hour later. The medical bay door slid open, and a figure entered that made Sarah's breath catch. She recognized him from countless military documentaries and news broadcasts. Admiral Thrace, the Supreme Commander of the Galactic Defense Force. He was Zephyrian, tall and lean with the distinctive crystalline features of his species. Behind him walked 2 other figures she didn't recognize, but their bearing marked them as high-ranking officers. Lieutenant Chen. Admiral Thrace's voice carried the harmonic undertones that made Zephyrian's speech sound like music. I am pleased to see you recovering well. Sarah tried to stand, but the Admiral gestured for her to remain seated. Sir, We were just defending civilians. We didn't mean to interfere with Defense Force operations. The Admiral's expression might have been amusement. With Zephyrians, it was always hard to tell. Interfere? Lieutenant, in 72 hours you have accomplished something our combined fleets have failed to do in 50 years of warfare. I don't understand. One of the other officers stepped forward. This was clearly human. An older woman with general stars on her uniform. Lieutenant, I'm General Martinez, Human Military Liaison. What Admiral Thrace means is that you didn't just defeat a Zarathi raiding party. You created the first documented case of Zarathi forces retreating from a battle they were winning. Sarah stared at them. They were winning. We barely survived. Exactly, Admiral Thrace said. The Zarathi have superior technology, superior numbers, and superior training. By every metric we use to measure military effectiveness, they should have destroyed your ships in minutes. Instead, they withdrew after suffering minimal casualties. Do you know why? Sarah shook her head, still trying to understand why the Supreme Commander of the galaxy's military forces was standing in her hospital room. The third officer, who appeared to be Karathi based on his scaled skin and elongated skull, spoke for the first time. Because you did something unpredictable, something that made no tactical sense. You turned a cargo freighter into a weapon, used mining equipment as military hardware, and convinced civilian ships to engage military fighters. No computer model could have predicted your actions. And that, General Martinez continued, is exactly what we've been missing in our fight against the Zarathi. They've been winning because they can predict our every move. Our tactics follow established patterns, our strategies are based on proven doctrine, and our responses are calculated using standard military theory. Admiral Thrace moved closer to Sarah's bed. The Zarathi are masters of conventional warfare, but you, Lieutenant, are anything but conventional. Your files marked you as untrained, but perhaps being untrained is exactly what the galaxy needs. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What are you asking me? General Martinez pulled out a data pad and handed it to her. We're offering you a commission, full lieutenant rank in the Galactic Defense Force Special Operations Division. You would lead a new unit comprised entirely of humans with unconventional backgrounds. Cargo pilots, miners, engineers, civilians who think outside military doctrine. You want me to train an army of untrained soldiers? We want you to teach them to fight like humans, Admiral Thrace said. Not like Zephyrians or Karathi or any other species. Like humans. Sarah looked at the commission orders on the datapad. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. Official military rank, command authority, a chance to really make a difference in the war. But something nagged at her. Sir, with respect, what makes you think this will work? One battle doesn't prove a strategy. The Karathi officer smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. Because 3 days ago, reports of the Kepler Station incident began spreading through unofficial channels. Civilian ship crews, cargo pilots, mining operations. Humans throughout the galaxy are volunteering for military service. Not through official recruitment, but through private messages asking where they can sign up to fight like Lieutenant Chen. The Defense Force recruitment centers have been flooded, General Martinez added. We've had more volunteers in the last 3 days than in the previous 3 years combined. But they all have one condition. They want to serve under human command using human tactics. Admiral Thrace gestured toward the viewport, where Sarah could see the sprawling complex of Zenith Command. "Lieutenant, the other species in the Defense Force respect human courage, but they have never understood human thinking. After Kepler Station, they are beginning to realize that what they see as chaos, we should perhaps see as innovation." Sarah looked at Captain Morrison, who had remained quietly listening to the conversation. He nodded slightly, encouraging her to speak her mind. "Admiral, I appreciate the offer, but I have conditions of my own." The officers exchanged glances. It was probably the first time in galactic history that a lieutenant had tried to negotiate with the Supreme Commander. "Go ahead," Admiral Thrace said. "First, any unit I command maintains operational independence. We plan our own missions and execute them our way. Second, we recruit from civilian populations, not military academies. Third, we get full access to intelligence reports and strategic planning sessions. I won't lead people into battle without knowing the real situation. And fourth," General Martinez asked, seeming to anticipate there was more. Sarah looked directly at Admiral Thrace. "I want Captain Morrison as my executive officer. He was willing to die for strangers at Kepler Station. That's exactly the kind of officer I need." Morrison straightened in his chair, his expression shifting from surprise to determination. "I accept, Lieutenant." Admiral Thrace was quiet for a long moment, his crystalline features reflecting the light from the medical bay's overhead panels. Finally, he nodded. "Your conditions are acceptable, but I have one requirement of my own. This unit will be designated as an experimental command. Your methods will be studied, your tactics analyzed, and your results measured against conventional forces. If human unpredictability proves to be a sustainable advantage rather than a lucky accident, it could change how we fight this war." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She was about to become responsible not just for her own life, but for proving that humanity deserved a place on the galactic stage. "When do we begin?" "Immediately," General Martinez replied. "We have a situation developing in the Outer Rim that requires exactly the kind of unconventional thinking you demonstrated at Kepler Station. The Zerathi have established a supply depot on an asteroid base that our conventional forces can't assault without massive casualties." Admiral Thrace handed her another datapad. "Your first mission, Lieutenant. Study it, plan your approach, and show us what untrained humans can accomplish when properly motivated." As the officers filed out of the medical bay, Sarah looked at the mission briefing and smiled. The Zerathi had chosen their asteroid base because it was impossible to attack using standard military doctrine. Its location in an unstable asteroid field made conventional fleet movements impossible, and its defensive systems could destroy any ship large enough to carry serious weapons. But Sarah wasn't thinking about conventional fleet movements or serious weapons. She was thinking about cargo freighters, mining equipment, and the kind of tactics that no military academy would ever teach. The files had marked her untrained, but she was about to show the galaxy that sometimes the best training was no training at all. 6 weeks after the Battle of Kepler Station, Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood in the briefing room of the converted cargo station that had become headquarters for the newly formed Human Irregular Forces. Around the table sat 12 of the most unconventional military officers in galactic history, former cargo pilots, mining engineers, salvage operators, and even a deep space explorer who had volunteered after hearing about the unit through unofficial channels. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, activating the holographic display in the center of the table, "meet our target." The image showed an asteroid roughly the size of a small moon, its surface bristling with defensive weapons and docking facilities. Energy readings indicated massive power generation capabilities and what appeared to be a substantial garrison. Captain Morrison, now sporting the insignia of her executive officer, whistled low. "That's not a supply depot. That's a fortress." "Exactly," Sarah replied. "Intelligence estimates suggest it houses enough weapons and equipment to supply a full Zerathi invasion fleet. More importantly, it's positioned to control 3 major shipping lanes between the core worlds and the Outer Rim colonies." Former salvage operator Lieutenant Commander Jackson, a weathered woman who had spent 20 years pulling wrecks out of asteroid fields, leaned forward to study the display. "The approach vectors are all wrong for conventional assault. Too much debris, too many gravitational anomalies. Any fleet trying to reach that thing would be picked off long before they got into weapons range." "Which is exactly why the Defense Force asked us to take a look at it," Sarah said. They've been planning this assault for 8 months, and every simulation ends in disaster. Lieutenant Torres, who had commanded mining operations in asteroid fields for most of his adult life, manipulated the holographic controls to get a better view of the base's structure. The Zarathi built this smart. They're using the asteroid's natural rotation to create overlapping defensive fields. No blind spots, no weak approaches. "What about resources?" asked Lieutenant Park, a former deep space explorer whose knowledge of exotic stellar phenomena had earned her a place on the team. "How are they supplied?" Sarah smiled. "Now that's the right question. The base is too far from Zarathi territory for regular supply runs. They have to be getting resources somewhere." She manipulated the display to show a wider view of the system. 3 days ago, one of our reconnaissance drones picked up something interesting. Every 72 hours, an automated cargo vessel arrives from the inner system. It delivers processed metals and other raw materials that the base needs to maintain operations. Morrison caught on first. "You want to hijack their supply ship?" "Better than that. I want to become their supply ship." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Lieutenant Jackson was the first to speak. "Sarah, that's insane even by our standards. Zarathi security protocols are incredibly sophisticated. We can't just waltz in there pretending to be a cargo ship." Sarah activated another section of the display. "We don't have to pretend. We're going to use a real cargo ship, theirs." The image showed detailed scans of the automated supply vessel, a purely functional craft designed for maximum cargo capacity with minimal defensive systems. The beauty of automated ships is that they follow predictable patterns. They're efficient, reliable, and completely unimaginative. "Unlike us," Torres said with growing understanding. "Exactly. Here's the plan. We intercept the supply ship at the outer edge of the system, download its control codes and cargo manifest, then send it on its way. Meanwhile, we use our own ships to replicate its cargo configuration and approach signature." Lieutenant Park studied the tactical implications. The base's sensors would see exactly what they expect to see: a routine supply delivery right on schedule, but instead of processed metals we'd be carrying 12 very motivated humans with extremely flexible tactical thinking, Sarah finished. Morrison frowned at the display. "Sarah, even if we get inside the base, we're talking about a facility that houses hundreds of Zarathi warriors. How do we neutralize that kind of opposition with just 12 people?" Sarah's smile widened. "We don't fight them. We turn their own base against them." She highlighted various sections of the asteroid base. "The Zarathi are masters of efficiency. Every system on that base is automated and centrally controlled. Life support, power distribution, defensive systems, all of it runs through a central command network." "You want to hack their computer systems?" Jackson asked skeptically. "Zarathi cybersecurity is supposed to be impenetrable." "From the outside, yes, but we're not going to attack from the outside." Lieutenant Chen activated a new section of the briefing. "Former Specialist Williams, our resident computer expert, has been studying captured Zarathi technology for the past month. Tell them what you found." Williams, a quiet woman who had run communication systems for asteroid mining operations before the war, stood up nervously. "The Zarathi design philosophy prioritizes efficiency over security when it comes to internal systems. They assume that if you're physically inside their facility, you're authorized to be there." "Which means," Morrison prompted. "Which means," Sarah continued, "that once we're inside the base, we'll have access to maintenance terminals that can control virtually everything. We don't need to fight our way through hundreds of warriors. We just need to reach one computer terminal and convince their own systems to do the fighting for us." Torres was nodding slowly. "Environmental controls, artificial gravity, even the weapon systems that defend the base, all of it controlled from inside. The Zarathi built themselves the galaxy's most sophisticated prison," Sarah said. "We're just going to help them lock themselves inside it." Lieutenant Park raised a concern. "Even if the plan works, how do we escape? Once we start tampering with their systems, they'll know they've been infiltrated." Sarah's expression grew serious. "That's the biggest risk. We'll have maybe 10 minutes between initial infiltration and total lockdown. We need to accomplish our objectives and reach the extraction point before the base goes into full security mode." Morrison studied the tactical display one more time. What exactly are our objectives? Are we just disabling the base, or are we looking for something specific? Sarah highlighted a section deep within the asteroid's core. Intelligence believes this is where they keep their strategic planning data, battle plans, supply routes, even information about their main fleet positions. If we can access those systems before we shut the base down, we could gain intelligence that would give the Defense Force a significant advantage. Jackson whistled appreciatively. So we're not just taking out a supply depot, we're potentially stealing the keys to their entire war effort. That's the idea. But I need to be clear with all of you. This mission has a very high probability of being a one-way trip. We're talking about infiltrating a heavily defended enemy stronghold with no backup and no extraction guarantee. The room was quiet for a moment as each officer considered the risks. Finally, Torres spoke up. Lieutenant, with respect, when has that ever stopped us? We're the people who turned cargo freighters into warships and mining equipment into weapons. If anyone can pull off something this crazy, it's us. One by one, the other officers nodded their agreement. These were people who had already proven their willingness to risk everything for the chance to strike back at humanity's enemies. Sarah felt a familiar mixture of pride and terror. 6 weeks ago, she had been a rejected applicant with no formal military training. Now she was planning an operation that could change the course of the war. All right then. Let's figure out how to steal a Zarathi supply depot from the inside out. As the team began working through the operational details, Sarah couldn't help but think about how far they had all come. The galaxy had called them untrained, unpredictable, unconventional. They were about to prove that sometimes, those were exactly the qualities needed to win an impossible fight. The Frontlines were about to witness what happened when untrained humans decided to rewrite the rules of warfare. 3 weeks later, Sarah floated in zero gravity within the cargo hold of a modified freighter, watching as the Zarathi supply depot grew larger on their approach sensors. The plan had worked flawlessly so far. They had intercepted the automated supply ship, downloaded its authentication codes, and now appeared on enemy sensors as nothing more than a routine cargo delivery. Docking clamps engaging, reported Torres from the pilot's seat. We're committed now. Around her, the other 11 members of the human irregular forces made final equipment checks. They wore standard maintenance suits that would blend in with the depot's work environment. But hidden beneath the civilian clothing were weapons, explosives, and computer intrusion gear. Remember, we have exactly 10 minutes from the moment Williams accesses the central computer before they realize what's happening, Sarah said through the comm system. Torres and Jackson, secure the docking bay and prepare our extraction route. Park and Morrison, you're with me heading for the command center. Everyone else, you know your assignments. The freight bay doors opened with a hiss of equalizing atmosphere. Sarah's heart pounded as they stepped onto the deck of the Zarathi supply depot. But the receiving bay appeared to be automated. Robotic systems began unloading their fake cargo while the humans moved deeper into the facility. The base was larger than the intelligence reports had suggested. Corridors stretched in all directions, lined with the organic-looking architecture that characterized Zarathi construction. But there was something else. The corridors were surprisingly empty. This is strange, Morrison whispered as they moved toward the command center. Where is everyone? Sarah was wondering the same thing. A facility this size should have hundreds of personnel, but they had encountered only a few maintenance workers who had paid no attention to their presence. They reached the first checkpoint without incident. Williams went to work on the access terminal while the others stood guard. Her fingers flew over the alien interface as lines of code scrolled across her portable display. Got it, she reported after 90 seconds. I'm into their internal network. Sarah, you need to see this. Williams handed her the display and Sarah felt her blood turn cold. The data showed that the supply depot wasn't just a storage facility. It was a staging ground for the largest Zarathi fleet ever assembled. More than 300 warships were hidden throughout the asteroid field, preparing for a massive assault on the core worlds. When? Sarah asked. According to this, the attack begins in 18 hours. Park looked up from her own scanner. That explains why the base is so empty. Most of the garrison has already deployed to their ships. Morrison grabbed Sarah's arm. We have to warn the Defense Force if this fleet reaches the core worlds. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. 300 Zarathi warships could overwhelm the galaxy's defenses and reach Earth within days. but their communication equipment couldn't penetrate the base's jamming systems. And even if they could get word out, the Defense Force couldn't mobilize a response fleet in time. Williams, can you access the fleet communication network from here? Maybe, but it would take time to crack their command codes. At least 20 minutes? We don't have 20 minutes. The moment we start trying to hack their fleet communications, every security system in this base will activate. Tora's voice crackled over their comm system. Lieutenant, we've got movement in the outer corridors. Looks like a security patrol heading our way. Sarah made a decision that would either save the galaxy or get them all killed. Change of plans. We're not just gathering intelligence. We're going to stop this fleet before it can launch. Sarah, that's impossible, Morrison protested. We're 12 people against hundreds of warships. No, we're 12 untrained humans against a species that thinks they understand how we fight. Sarah turned to Williams. Can you access the base's power distribution network? Yes, but do it. I want complete control over every energy system in this facility. As Williams worked, Sarah outlined her new plan to the team. It was insane, even by their standards, but it was also the only chance they had to prevent the destruction of human civilization. The Zarathi fleet is powered by antimatter reactors, Sarah explained. Those reactors need constant cooling and monitoring. If we can overload the base's power grid, we can create electromagnetic interference that will disrupt the fleet's power management systems. Torres caught on first. You want to cause a cascade failure across the entire fleet? Exactly. We turn the supply depot into the galaxy's biggest electromagnetic pulse generator. Every ship in the asteroid field gets hit simultaneously. Morrison stared at her. Sarah, the kind of power surge you're talking about would destroy this base and everything in it. Including us? Maybe. But it's the only way to stop 300 enemy warships from reaching Earth. The security patrol was getting closer. Sarah could hear the chittering voices of Zarathi warriors echoing through the corridors. Williams finished her work on the power distribution network and looked up with a grim expression. I can do it, but once I initiate the sequence, we'll have maybe 2 minutes before the whole base tears itself apart. Sarah activated her comm system and opened a channel to all team members. Human Irregular Forces, this is Lieutenant Chen. In 60 seconds, we're going to create the largest electromagnetic pulse in recorded history. It will save billions of lives, but we probably won't survive to see it. Responses came back immediately from every team member. Not one voice expressed doubt or hesitation. Standing by, Lieutenant. Ready when you are. Let's light this place up. Sarah felt a surge of pride that almost overwhelmed her fear. These were people who had been dismissed as untrained civilians, but they were about to sacrifice themselves to save a galaxy that had never quite accepted them as equals. Williams, initiate the power surge sequence. The computer specialist's hands moved over her controls with practiced precision. Lights throughout the base began fluctuating as massive amounts of energy coursed through systems never designed to handle such loads. Cascade initiated, Williams reported. All base systems are now drawing maximum power simultaneously. Alarms began sounding throughout the facility as safety systems detected the dangerous power levels. In the asteroid field around them, Sarah knew that 300 Zarathi warships were suddenly experiencing catastrophic system failures as electromagnetic interference disabled their reactors and weapon systems. 1 minute until overload, Williams announced. Through the base's communication system, Sarah could hear confused reports from the fleet. Ships were losing power, navigation systems were failing, and weapons were offline across the entire formation. Lieutenant, the security patrol has found us, Torres reported. They're trying to breach the command center. Hold them off for 30 more seconds. The sound of weapons fire echoed through the corridors as the human irregular forces made their final stand. These untrained civilians, fighting with improvised weapons and desperate courage, held back trained Zarathi warriors for the precious seconds needed to complete their mission. Overload in 10 seconds, Williams called out. It's been an honor serving with you all. Sarah opened her comm one final time. Defense Force Command, this is Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Human Irregular Forces. The Zarathi invasion fleet in the Outer Rim has been neutralized. Repeat, the invasion fleet has been stopped. The power surge reached critical levels. Throughout the asteroid field, 300 enemy warships drifted powerless in space, their invasion plans ruined by 12 humans who refused to accept defeat. As the base began to tear itself apart around them, Sarah smiled. The files had marked her untrained, but the Frontlines had crowned her something else entirely. She was a legend. The electromagnetic pulse that followed could be seen from 3 star systems away. When Defense Force recovery teams arrived 2 days later, they found the remains of the largest Zarathi fleet ever assembled, floating helpless among the debris of what had once been an impregnable fortress. They also found 12 escape pods, heavily damaged but intact, their occupants unconscious but alive. Sometimes, Sarah reflected as she recovered in a medical bay, being untrained meant you were too stubborn to know when something was impossible. The galaxy would never again mistake human unpredictability for weakness. The Frontlines had seen what untrained humans could accomplish, and the legend would spread to every world, every species, every corner of civilized space. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not through superior technology or ancient wisdom, but through the simple refusal to give up when faced with impossible odds. The files might mark them untrained, but the universe would remember them as the species that redefined what it meant to fight for survival.